Good day, guys. Welcome back again to our YouTube channel at Teacher Andrew Geography. And today, our main question will be: can any country print their own money? Because we are seeing many countries are suffering from economic depression, suffering with their currency circulation. Some are more poor than others, others are rich. So, guys, we are here to understand this. Can any country print their own money? Because if any country does this, it has to follow these procedures as you're going to watch in our tutorial. So guys, like, share, subscribe to our YouTube channel. So our question was, can any country print their own money? Okay, so guys, the answer is yes, it can. Any country has the ability to print their own currency. However, the amount of currency in that country can be printed, and it is typically regulated by their own central bank. So it's under central bank that relegates or regulates this activity to be done. So in this subject, you may find many limitations and many positive and effects as the central bank regulates this activity to be done. So other nations, guys, may be aware about the certain countries' currency printing activities through many channels, also through international organizations like International Monetary Funds, guys, it's IMF, or through financial market signals like changes in exchange rates. All this can determine that maybe one country is printing or making its own money. So guys, however, it's worth noting that some countries may choose to keep their currency printing activities more secretive for a variety of reasons. So guys, every country has its own central bank, which is responsible for regulating the country's monetary system. The central bank is typically responsible for determining how much currency to produce, okay, setting up interest rates, okay, and manage the country's foreign exchange reserves in the World Bank. So all those are responsibilities of the central bank in the country. Okay guys, in general, central banks try to maintain a stable and a predictable supply of currency in order to promote economic stability. So this is done, guys, by monitoring factors such as inflation, economic growth, and exchange rates worldwide against their currency, okay, with other countries' currencies. So the central bank in your country determines that there is a need of more currency circulation if there is an increase in the supply, okay, or production done by a particular country. However, guys, printing too much currency can also lead to inflation. We are going to understand what is inflation, and many of you who did economics understand this term. It's not a new term. So inflation, guys, can erode the value of currency and harm the economy, okay, however much it can be positive or negative, guys. For example, central banks have rules that limit the amount of currency they can print and in a given period of time. So central banks, guys, they have rules and a limit on the particular amount of currency they can print and in a specific time, not every time that they can print money. So it also requires them to hold a certain amount in the foreign reserves to back up their currency. So an example, if the central bank in Uganda needs to do this to print money or to request for money printing, so it has to meet a particular amount of money to be kept in the foreign reserves to back up their currency. One of the foreign reserves, we have the World Bank. So all countries try to back up a certain currency, okay, in the reserve in order to request for a certain amount of money. So guys, according to this system, according to this chain, we've seen factors coming in such as inflation, economic growth. How can they impact any country to print their money? So guys, before we go further, let's understand inflation. So guys, inflation is a general increase in the prices of goods and services over time, resulting into decrease in the purchasing power of the money. So in other way, someone can understand inflation like meaning the same amount of money that you used to buy fewer goods and services than it could buy in the past time. So this is guys the change in the money power, okay, in the money power, whereby if you used to buy maybe a kilogram of sugar 6,000 shillings, I'm talking about in Ugandan shillings, and you reach a certain amount whereby this money is either doubled or decreased, okay. So this results, or it decreases the purchasing power of your money. You might find when you need like 10,000 shillings to buy 1 kilogram of sugar that used to be sold at 6,000 shillings only. So guys, this inflation is measured by the rate of change in the price level of goods and services over time, and this type of measurement, we call it consumer price index. For people who studied economics, they understand the consumer price index. So the role of the consumer price index, or the CPI, this tracks the prices of goods, services that an average consumer may purchase, that an average person or anybody like you that can purchase. That's a role of the CPI that helps us to track down the inflation in the country. So some of the causes of inflation in the country can result, or can be like, if there is an increase in consumer demand, whereby many people want to purchase a certain demand, it may increase the prices for the demand and leads to inflation in the country. We also have the decrease in the supply of goods and services. If the production or the making of goods is decreased, okay, we may find ourselves when the prices are becoming high in a certain country, it causes inflation. We also have another factor to be the changes in the production costs. If manufacturers or industries find changes in the production costs, maybe high costs for raw materials, we may find ourselves getting inflation when the prices rise than before. We also have changes in the government policies. The policies of the government, the policies made by the government, such as taxes, subsidies, they can also lead to changes in the prices. For example, if the government charges more taxes on the goods, okay, in the production of the goods, or on the goods on the market or in the international market, this can also result to increase of prices, thus leading to inflation in a certain country. However guys, inflation can have both positive and negative effects on the economy, and these may appear in short or long term, okay. So some of them we can see them as of now, others they can manifest after a long time. So guys, we need to understand also, how do the central banks limit the amount of currency they can print? How do they do to control this amount of the currency that they can print? Okay, how are they trying to control? So central banks have few mechanisms or few ways guys to limit the amount of currency they can print, and here are some of the examples I'm sharing with you. The very first one, central bank, they set a target inflation rate, okay. So the central banks often target inflation rate, and they aim to achieve through their monetary policy. So if the central bank guys prints too much currency, it can lead to inflation, which can also cause the value of the currency to decrease and harm the economy, especially on the world market. So there is no need to guys to make or to print too much currencies, because we may face inflation and we may have issues. For example, the recent example in Africa we had in Zimbabwe, whereby someone had to collect almost a whole wheelbarrow to purchase bread. So that means they had a lot of currency running in their system and decreased the value of money, okay, whereby one had to collect a lot of paper notes to purchase a single item. So there is the second one, the second limit, how central banks limit inflation or in the circulation of their money. The reserve requirements, okay, central banks reserves requirements. So these banks may require commercial banks to hold a certain amount in the reserves in order to limit the money currency that can be created through loans. So they implement rules and they tell certain commercial banks that are running in the country to hold a certain amount, okay. All banks have their security, they have their money they keep in the central bank, okay. This is done by the central banks to limit excess money into circulation. For example, if a central bank requires banks to hold at least 10% of their deposits as reserves, okay, so then the banks can only lend out to the public only 90% of those deposits. This helps to limit the amount of currency that can be created through the banking system. The other third policy they always use to limit money circulation so that we don't face inflation, they create open market operations. So central banks can buy or sell government bonds to influence the amount of the currency in the circulation. You understand, they try to set up open markets for anyone to come and buy and purchase. This strategy is done in order to influence the amount of the currency in the circulation, and they keep it back in the central banks. So guys, if the central banks or the central bank buys bonds, it injects money into the economy, which can increase money supply, and if the central bank sells bonds, it reduces the money supply. So this is done through open market operations, whereby central banks can control the amount of the currency in the circulation through using open market operations strategy to collect money from public, and they have it in control. So the other fourth limit they always try to use to control the money circulation, there is a policy of interest rates. For those who have used banks, especially when acquiring loans, you've seen interest rates. The money you pay has interest according from the money you borrowed. So central banks can adjust, can increase, guys, or reduce the interest rates to influence the amount of currency in circulation. So guys, if the central bank raises interest rates, it means it will make borrowing more expensive, which can reduce the amount of currency in circulation. And if the central bank lowers interests, it makes borrowing cheaper, which can increase the currency in circulation. Overall, guys, we should understand that central banks use a combination of these factors to limit the amount of the currency they can print and maintain an economic stability, thus development. So guys, the other question we may try to find out as we are trying to understand, can any country print their own money? Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. So guys, also we need to know how the central banks determine their target inflation rate. Okay, how do they determine their target inflation? Actually determine their target inflation rate. Before, we understood inflation as the general increase in the prices of goods and services over time, resulting into a decrease in purchasing power of money. So guys, how do these central banks typically determine the target inflation? So this is based on a variety of factors that may include, guys, economic goals, historical inflation rates, and the current state of the economy. So guys, About the economic goals, the central bank may have specific economic goals that they may aim to achieve through a monetary policy, such as they may promote economic growth, stabilize employment, or maintain financial stability, okay, among the people living in the country. So this target inflation can be set to help to achieve these goals. The banks use the target inflation rate to achieve such a goal in promoting economic growth, stabilizing employment, or maintaining financial stability. So the other strategy they always check on the historical inflation rates, okay? So central banks may look at historical inflation rates. How has it been happening before in a certain country to determine an appropriate target rate? For example, they may look at the average inflation rate over the past few years or decades to determine the target rate that is consistent with past performance. So they always try to see the activities. How has inflation been effective in a certain country? So they use such strategy to determine the inflation rate, okay? So guys, we also have the global inflation. This is worldwide inflation. It is as another strategy they always use, okay? So central banks may also consider global inflation rates worldwide when setting their target rate goal. So if inflation is higher in other countries, it means, or it may be more difficult for a central bank to achieve a lower target rate without causing economic disruptions. So also they use the global inflation rates. They check with other countries, okay, as they determine their rate, as they determine their target inflation rate in order to control inflation in the country. So the other, as number 4, they also check on the economic conditions, okay? When they are trying to set target inflation rate, they also check on the economic conditions in that certain country. So central banks may also consider the current state of the economy when setting their target rate. For example, if the economy is in a recession, okay, a higher target inflation rate may be appropriate to stimulate growth. Yeah, so if the economy is not doing well, the bank may choose a higher target inflation rate and may be appropriate to stimulate or to lead to growth. So once a bank or once a central bank has determined its target inflation rate, it will typically use its monetary policy tools such as adjusting interest rates or controlling the money supply to try to achieve that rate. If inflation is too high or too low, the central bank may adjust its policies to bring inflation back to the target rate, thus development. So guys, there are many effects of inflation, but let's discuss some of them, okay? One of the main effects, it reduces the purchasing power of the currency, okay? In case the country is facing inflation, their currency is reduced in powers, especially when one is trying to buy a particular item or a commodity, may require to collect more notes to purchase one item. So that is all inflation, and it can reduce standards of living for individuals in a country and then leads to increased poverty. So the other second factor or second effect of inflation or of high inflation in the country, it reduces investment, okay? So it can reduce or causes difficult for businesses to plan and invest, okay, due to fear to make losses in their prices and costs they may incur in their production. So this leads, actually, when stakeholders get that fear, they can also reduce their investments they may apply in their businesses, thus limiting economic growth. It also reduces savings, guys, because you need a lot of notes to purchase one item, so it's very hard for people to save in an inflation state. So when savings are reduced, guys, this can lead to reduced investment. It can lead. So guys, we are still discussing about the effects of high inflation in a country. So guys, it reduces international competitiveness, especially in the international markets, where a country's exports may tend to be more expensive relative to other countries. So this effect can affect the production of profits of your country, which is another factor that may limit economic growth. Another effect of high inflation, it leads to reduced employment. Okay, so high inflation can make it more difficult for businesses to hire and retain employees, as high inflation causes or increases high costs of wages and benefits. So we may find when we are getting unemployment, thus leading to low economic growth and high increase of poverty in a country. Lastly, among the effects of high inflation, it also reduces confidence in the currency. So guys, high inflation can reduce confidence in a country's currency, as many people may be more likely to seek out for more stable currencies, and this can lead to capital flight and further economic instabilities. So when people tend to see that the currency has no value, they may adopt to choose other countries' currencies to use when they go to their international markets or when they are trying to purchase, thus leading to economic instability and low economic development in a country. So guys, overall high inflation can be harmful to an economy because it reduces purchasing power, investments, savings, leads to unemployment or reduces employment, and also affects international competitiveness at the market. So guys, for the reason, central banks and governments typically aim to keep inflation at a moderate and stable level. This is why they always take long to print new notes over time. They first control the old notes that are in the circulation. So guys, some of the examples of countries that have already faced high inflation. There have been many countries throughout the history, okay? And I know guys, you know some of them. For example, we know Zimbabwe, especially in the late 2000s. They faced hyperinflation, whereby the inflation rates reached over 79% at one point. So in their country, one to purchase or to buy one bread had to collect almost one wheelbarrow of coin and paper notes to buy one bread. So this was hyperinflation. It's even more than high inflation, sorry guys. It's even more than high inflation, sorry guys. So we also have Venezuela in the recent 2019. It also experienced high inflation. We have Germany in early 1920s. It experienced hyperinflation, okay. We also have Argentina, also experienced high inflation in 1980s and earlier 1990s. We also have Brazil, also experienced high inflation throughout its history in 1980s and earlier 1990s, among others, okay. So guys, those are just a few examples of the countries that have experienced high inflation. In general, high inflation can be very damaging to an economy, leading to economic instability, social unrest, and reduced living in the standards for all individuals. So guys, you all answered why countries can print their own money, okay. They can, but there are other factors, as we've just discussed, that always limit central banks to propose or to make or to print money, due to a lot of reasons we've just mentioned and factors that some are short term and others are long term that can affect the economy of the country. So guys, if you find our this tutorial informative, like, share, subscribe, and then thank you all for your time. See you in our next tutorial.